Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 395 of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today, the FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Converge 18. Converge 18 is a conference hosted by Conversant, who is sponsoring this podcast. It is an event which helps organizations bring about ethical transformations through solutions, innovation, and insight. It will be held October 9th and 10th in Denver, Colorado. At this event, you'll be able to network with over 300 of your peers, including C-suite executives, legal professional, HR leaders, and ethics and compliance visionaries. There will be 35 speakers, including Wei Chen, ECI CEO Pat Harded, EMBA Deputy Chief Compliance Officer Steph Vogel, and Carol Switzer, President of OSED. You will bring actionable takeaways to your compliance program from this event. There will be 2 keynotes, 5 general sessions, 12 discussion-based roundtables, and 18 interactive breakouts. The goal of Converge 18 is to arm you with information and strategy and tactics to transform your organization and career by connecting ethics to business performance through process augmentation and data visualization. I hope you can join me and many other compliance professionals at this event. Please stay tuned at the end of this podcast, where I will give you a code for a discount to this event. I'm sure that you will enjoy it. In today's podcast, I visit with Ellen Hunt. Ellen is the Chief Audit Executive and Ethics and Compliance Officer at AARP. She is a lawyer and ethics and compliance professional with extensive management expertise in designing, implementing, and operating ethics and compliance programs, including board governance, reporting, designing ethics educations, and managing enterprise risk processes across an organization. She has been featured as a top mind in Compliance Week. She's a contributor to Trust Inc., a guide for boards and C-suites. And she's been named in the top 100 thought leaders for trustworthy business 2018 and the last 3 years by Trust Across America. In this podcast, we consider the role of the board of directors in a best practices compliance program, but with the focus of how does the chief compliance officer inform the board and work with the board to facilitate compliance in the organization, and why compliance expertise on the board is so important. I think you'll find it a fascinating episode, and I know you will enjoy it. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, and I'm here with Ellen Hunt.
Well, welcome. I'm glad to be here, Tom.
Ellen, one of the things that has been constant over the past, I can't even begin to name the number of years, has been corporate scandals. And they've been in a wide variety of areas. There's corruption scandals, there's fraud scandals, there's pollution scandals, there's you name the scandal. And so I wanted to really ask you about some of the most recent scandals and one of or what you've seen as from the perspective of the board or the C-suite. So where can we take this?
Well, I think it's time for kind of a reset or a rethink on some of this. And, you know, Tom, I'm just amazed when I look at some of these situations. Just as the ethics and compliance profession has really progressed to be a true profession, we're no longer in the days of, gee, I was just too afraid to report. When you look at the Wells Fargo and the Uber and the Volkswagen and all of these kind of recent huge scandals, they did report. But nothing happened. And not only did people report, everybody knew what was going on. And that really makes me take some pause and say, now wait a minute, what can possibly be going on in these organizations where you have maybe 200 plus concerns raised and nothing gets done? So I've spent a lot of time with my board in the C-suite because, of course, they've asked a lot of questions about this, and with particular concern about sexual harassment or hostile workplace. Of, how could you not know that you maybe had somebody engaging in that behavior? To really talk about the importance of organizational justice, because to me this is the meat of any real program. You can't have a hotline and then do nothing about the concerns that get raised. That old saying of, gee, a hotline that never rings is a problem, but even worse is a hotline that rings that has no program behind it to get anything done. And so I think it's about transparency. These numbers need to be reported, and they need to be reported to the board and to the C-suite. And also, like in my organization, we report this to the whole organization on our intranet about how many concerns there were, what they were about, how they came in, and what we did about them, and how long it took us. Because, there's been all kinds of studies that show that the reason people come forward is they want this stuff to stop. And if we just have, the hotline or whatever mechanism that people want to use to raise concerns and we do nothing about it, well, why have a program at all? Right? We just really have to get focused on the hotline can't just be really a non-effective mechanism to solve these issues.
There's a wide variety of responses that a company in a compliance function can make in when an issue comes in on the hotline. Obviously, depending on seriousness, obviously depending on explanation. But I was wondering if you might be able to give some thoughts on what do you see as some of the potential responses to concerns, at least from the board or C-suite level.
Yeah, so again, I think this is a maturity of the ethics and compliance profession and the industry as a whole. I think we've got to kind of rethink about, is an investigation always the right reaction to a concern? And I'm putting this mainly in the context of Me Too and Us Too. But to some extent, we spend a lot of time sometimes figuring out who did what to whom, sometimes in situations where, frankly, we can never prove it. And we need to have more tools in our toolbox to actually really help what's going on in the area. And maybe these are in the forms of interventions such as training or reassignments or other kinds of ways to let people feel, A, they've been heard, and B, that something's being done about the situation, rather than necessarily focusing on who did what and when did it happen. And Tom, as you know, sometimes these investigations can take time. And frankly, the longer it takes to investigate some of these kinds of concerns where you may not have a conclusive outcome, the more toxic the workplace gets. So I think that it's really time for HR and management and ethics and compliance to come to the table and rethink some of those protocols and think about, can we do something else besides investigate, or something in addition to investigating to really help people get through what their issues or concerns are and let them know that they're being heard about what they have reported.
So along those lines, Ellen, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Justice has now advocated in writing that there needs to be compliance expertise on the board. And one of the things that we have seen, certainly in the era of Me Too, is greater diversity, greater gender diversity, greater racial diversity. But one of the questions I wanted to ask, should there be diversity which would include, from your perspective, compliance expertise on the board? And if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you look at a Wells Fargo, or you look at an Uber and maybe even a Volkswagen, there should have been somebody, if not at the C-suite level, but also on the board who said, well, wait a minute. How come we don't know how many concerns are raised in a year? How come we don't know that there's a backlog of 200 plus cases? How come we don't know how long it takes to, on average, to open and close an investigation? And how come we don't know what the disciplinary action is? And I think that you have to have somebody who really understands how an ethics and compliance program works, just like you want to have somebody who's a chief auditor, or somebody who has financial expertise, or somebody who has information security expertise, because you've got to have somebody who can ask the right questions and understand or demand that the right information is getting to the board so that the board can exercise its oversight duties. How can the board provide any oversight if it doesn't have information? And you have to get over this uncomfortness of, well, gee, we don't let anybody know who raised a concern about something because whatever. You can report these things in the aggregate, and you can discuss them in a way that protects confidentiality, and you can discuss them in ways that protects the company from potential legal liability. But I think if you don't have somebody who's got that kind of deep understanding of how these programs work, you can't as a board, and you certainly can't as an audit committee, exercise the right kind of oversight. But even more importantly, Tom, you're not operating in a way that you're mitigating your risk. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is mitigating your risk to your business.
So one of the conversations that unfortunately I think is a difficult conversation, but one that needs to occur, is if an organization can't support some of the initiatives, rethinks, or even policies and procedures that we've talked about, what should a CCO do? What should a CECO do? What should a compliance function do? What are your thoughts sort of on the independence of the CECO, Ellen?
Yeah. So, independence and access to the board and resources are kind of a golden trifecta for me. I think they all go hand in glove, and they interplay with each other very nicely. But I think the thing that you have to be prepared to do, and I think this can be very, very difficult, is you have to be prepared when you have not been listened to go outside, and you have to be prepared to walk. That independence means that you don't take your own self-interest in getting that paycheck and let it cloud your judgment or make you silent. And I know that's a tough thing. It's a very tough thing. And there are CEOs who have done it, and they have my greatest admiration for having the utmost courage. But you can't sit back and have a backlog of 200 plus complaints and pretend that your program is effective and pretend that as the CECO you're doing your job. You're just not. You can't be part of the cover-up. And of course, I encourage you to go through every avenue and tell your story again and again and again, and give everybody every opportunity to take action. But there's a point, and I think every CECO knows when it is, where you've got to ladder up, or maybe ladder out, and maybe you have to vote with your feet and you got to walk out.
So, Ellen, I'd like to change the focus just a bit, if I could, and ask you about the ethics and compliance dashboard that you use at AARP, and how you use that to report to the board of directors.
Yeah. We've devised a dashboard back when we really got our program up and off the ground, probably almost 10 years ago now. And I'll tell you, the real driver behind it was the concept of organizational justice and getting around the issue that employees have about, well, okay, I report a concern to you, but what happened? So we really kind of took it and boiled it down to each step how does a complaint come in, what kind of complaints there are, how long does it take to handle them, who handles them, and then, what happens? Are they true or not true? Substantiated, unsubstantiated? And then what kind of discipline is there? And as we looked at that and thought about, of course, maintaining confidentiality for those involved, but also reporting the numbers in a way that they were understandable, we thought this is a great tool for the C-suite and the board as well. So we kind of approached it backwards, but quarterly we have a dashboard, and that's exactly what it does. It talks about the number of concerns, what kind they are, how they came in. We happen to have about 60% of our population actually identify ourselves instead of being anonymous. And then how long it took us to deal with the concern, and then what happened. So, when people get fired, we report that, or if they have a written warning or they get coached and counseled, we'll let people know that. And we publish this to the organization on our intranet. And so employees know how many cases we get. Another thing that we do with this, Tom, because I think it's terribly important and an indicator of the culture, is I talk about the number of ethics questions we get. And we don't have a formal hotline or phone or web line for calls. It's really the ethics and compliance team. But the ratio between the number of ethics questions versus concern, it's always been higher. And I just think that's a real indicator that people trust the Ethics and Compliance Office. They come to us and ask questions before they take action, and we're able to provide advice and really work with them on practical solutions before things become allegations of misconduct, and there could be a need for an investigation. So we report on that as well. And I have shared with my board a number of articles about indicators of a strong ethical culture. And one is, well, how many people ask questions? And the other is looking at that anonymous versus those who identify themselves. And another thing that's an important issue here is timeliness. If it's taking you a really long time to resolve these concerns, that's going to undermine people's faith in your program.
So, Ellen, I'd like to maybe conclude with picking up on some of the concepts, at least I've noted from your remarks. And the first one is, you've talked about the relationship between the CCO, and the board and the C-suite. You've talked about communications, and it's really occurred to me that you're described really a partnership. It's a partnership with the compliance function headed by the CCO, with the C-suite, with the board of directors, that includes both education, understanding, and communications. Would that be a fair summation of what you've talked to us about?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, which is to make the organization successful.
Then you made clear that it's much beyond the tone at the top, and you've talked about conduct at the top. But what I've really heard in your remarks are that it's tone and conduct throughout the organization. You've talked about institutional justice. You've talked about responding to concerns, both inbound and outbound, or upward and downward, but it's really communicating all of this throughout the organization. It's not simply upwards from the CCO.
Yeah, I think the trickle down model just doesn't really work as a single model. Yes, it's very important what your leaders do. Everybody's watching what they do. Their conduct is very influential. And of course, we all care what our boss thinks, right? We know at the end of the day, it's really, I care what my boss thinks, because that's the person who's, going to get me the raise or the promotion or the good job assignments. But I really think that it has to be much more It's the conduct. It's much more than the speeches, and it just, we're not looking on high, so to speak, for people to tell us what to do. I think every employee has to take on a responsibility for the tone, and it's really tone everywhere. With that tone being that there's one set of rules for everyone.
And then you've used a word several times that I really am going to have to incorporate into my repertoire, which is rethink. And you've talked about rethinking the CCO role. You've talked about a rethink at the C-suite and board level. You've talked about a rethink in the context of tone as opposed to conduct. You've talked about a lot of things that I really see the compliance profession really needing, or as the compliance profession perhaps more appropriately has matured, it's now thinking about different things, and we do need a rethink. So I was wondering if, in the light of Me Too, in the light of the directions that has gone, if there are situations or it's time, what else might you see a time for a rethink from the compliance practitioner perspective?
Yeah. So at the board level, I think it's really time to kind of rethink or reset some of our practices and thoughts about risk. And it sounds old and cliche, but it's about breaking down these silos. Usually the ethics and compliance is all into reputation risk, generally driven by misconduct. But we have to be connected with our enterprise risk professionals. We've got to be connected with the folks in internal audit. Reputation risks can arise anywhere at any time. And we just need to truly understand how the organization is mitigating its risk, what its risk tolerance is, and how is it going to respond to any kind of crisis. And we've got to get out of our offices and talk with people about risk and understand it in a way that is comprehensive instead of, one group owns this risk and one group owns that risk. And I see the reputation risk as a risk that goes across all the other risks. And we need to really just be there and talk with our colleagues about that. And the board should frankly be driving that kind of a risk convergence so that we, the board and everybody else, understands how are you handling risk and what's the role for the ethics and compliance department when it comes to reputation risk. I think the other reset is about conduct, tone at the top, and really understanding that it's just much more comprehensive than that. And it's really, really telling people what you expect them, what your ethical expectations are from them, from the mailroom to the boardroom. And there isn't a different set of rules between the mailroom and the boardroom. And then I really think that the ethics profession has to take on kind of the hard work about thinking, how do you respond to some of these concerns? I think we know from Me Too and Us Too and some of these other situations that just getting out and training everyone, not really always that effective or the answer. Doing an investigation for every circumstance, maybe not really the right response. And I think we have to increase our toolbox here and think through maybe the protocols that we have in place and really consider, well, what is the best response to some of these situations, and be open to the fact that it might not be an investigation.
Well, Ellen, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but this has been a fascinating exploration of a wide variety of issues from the board of directors perspective, from the C-suite perspective, certainly from the CECO/CCO perspective, from the compliance perspective, and literally down to the shop floor perspective. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. My pleasure.
Hello again. This is Tom Fox. Ellen Hunt will be speaking at Converge 18, and this podcast has been a preview of some of her remarks. As an added bonus, I'm able to offer a discount of 50% off to listeners of this podcast who'd like to attend Converge 18. Simply fill in the discount code TomFoxVIP, that's TOMFOX VIP, all caps, when you register, and you'll receive a discount of 50% off. I hope you will join us at Converge 18. I think it's going to be one of the best conferences, certainly in the fall. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another episode. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.